Our reading today is taken from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 17, verses 1 to 9. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, "Don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." Open our eyes, see the glory of the King. Lift up your voice, let his praises sing. I love you, Lord. I will proclaim. Hallelujah. I will bless your name. Open our eyes, see the glory of the King. Lift up your voice, let his praises ring. I love you, Lord. I will proclaim. Hallelujah. I will bless your name. I will bless your name. I will bless your name.
The story of Jesus' transfiguration is obviously a significant one because it appears in 3 of the 4 Gospels. The only one who doesn't tell it is John. Now the story comes very soon after Peter had made that wonderful declaration, "You are the Messiah, the Son of God." And then, and only then, Jesus began to tell them that he would be arrested, put to death, and that he would rise again. But they didn't take that very well. And Peter actually said, "No, Jesus, no way, we're not going to let that happen to you." Only to be told, "Peter, you're not thinking God's way, you're thinking human ways." So the disciples were fairly confused about this. I mean, they'd seen Jesus do miracles, they'd heard his teaching and realised that it was far more profound than anything else they'd ever heard. They knew they'd just come to understand he was the Messiah, so they couldn't see any future if he were put to death. Now he took 3 of them up the mountain to pray. That was Peter, James and John. He was praying, but the disciples were tired and they fell asleep. When they woke, they saw the most amazing sight. Jesus was there, but he was shining with such brilliance that really it couldn't be described. It says it was like the sun, and his clothes were as white as light. And then they saw Moses and Elijah appear with him, and he was talking with them. The light was not shining upon Jesus. The light was shining from Jesus. You know, when Moses and Elijah at previous times had been given the opportunity to see the glory of God shone on them. But it was light that was shining from Jesus because He is the glory of God. Now remember, the disciples had come to the understanding that Jesus was the Messiah, but then they'd been shattered by the news that he would be arrested and put to death. But here, 3 of the disciples are being shown that he was indeed the glorious Messiah. They were seeing him in the glory to which he would ascend. And that must have been an amazing assurance to them that despite his death, he would be victorious. What I believe actually happened here, for a brief moment, they had their spiritual eyes opened and they could see the reality of the spiritual world which is all around us. Normally we don't see it because our eyes are very physical, but the spiritual world is all around us. Doesn't mean just because we can't see the spiritual world doesn't mean it's not there. There are some people, and it's not everybody, who have actually seen angels. In 2 Kings chapter 6 we have the story of the Aramean army surrounding the town of Dothan because they wanted to capture the prophet Elisha. Now when Elisha's servant went out in the morning, he was terrified because he saw all these troops surrounding the town. But Elisha prayed that God would open his eyes to see the spiritual reality that those who were with them were more than those who were against them. And his spiritual eyes were opened, and suddenly he saw that all around on the hills were chariots of fire surrounding the Aramean army. This moment of transfiguration was a moment when the disciples had their spiritual eyes opened to reassure them that Jesus was the Messiah. Not only had they their spiritual eyes opened, but they also had the glory of God descend upon them, and they heard his physical voice saying this was his Son, the one in whom he was well pleased. And then God finished by saying, listen to him. And this is very important. They were to realise that what Jesus was saying about his coming death and resurrection was true, and it was meant to be. They'd need that assurance to face what was going to happen. There's also a lot of symbolism in this story. Jesus was seen with Moses and Elijah. Now Moses was the great prophet, and there was the prophecy that there would be another prophet just like Moses. Deuteronomy 18:15. Instead, he will send you a prophet like me from among your own people, and you are to obey him. Moses was also seen as the lawgiver. Then Elijah was expected to return before the day of the Lord. Malachi 4:5. See, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before the great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. So having these 2 figures appear with Jesus was showing the disciples that indeed Jesus was the fulfilment of all the law and the prophets. And it's quite significant that when they looked up again, it was only Jesus. Moses and Elijah had gone. It was only Jesus because Jesus was the fulfilment of all God's plan, and in him and him alone all truth was to be found.